Welcome to another episode of the News4JAGs podcast. Jamal St here alongside Justin Barney. All right, Justin, day one of the draft officially in the books. The Jaguars have a brand new player, Brian Thomas Jr. How do you feel?
Yeah, I feel good. And if you see my eye, Jamal, I had a detached retina this week, and I missed the draft party and everything. I missed the draft. Guys did an awesome job. You and Alessandra, everybody behind the scenes, great job. So it was awesome watching that at home and kind of seeing it from an outsider's perspective. So great job last night, the coverage and everything like that. And people, if they've listened to our pod or watched it in the last few months, you've heard us talk about Brian Thomas Jr. and the potential. And I think it was you even last week or the week before who said, I would be happy if they traded down and took a Brian Thomas or took a cornerback maybe a little bit lower than at 17. You would feel a little bit better than getting him at 17. And lo and behold, that's what happened. You trade back, Trent Baalke trades back, get some additional picks, and ended up with wide receiver 4 in this year's draft. I thought it was good. I'm a little hesitant because the Jaguars' wide receiver first-round history is dubious, shall we say.
Well, most of their position first-round history is bad. We went through some of it during our draft, and I was like, at some point, one of these stills is going to get better. I think offensive line might have been the best. Our quarterback wasn't bad either, since you had Jalen Ramsey and Bryant on it. But goodness, it was rough.
Bad.
It is not the prettiest picture, but that's just because the team has ultimately struggled. So yeah, I love the trade back.
Yep.
You trade back and you get a guy that you probably would have taken at 17 anyway. I think that sort of opportunity is huge. And you pick up some picks for next year. If you go by the trade value chart, Jaguars rock.
Right.
So like Trent Baalke, masterclass there by him to pull off that sort of deal. So you sit there at 17, and I think we were all getting to 17 and thinking, oh, this board's falling perfectly. Quinyon Mitchell, Terrion Arnold are both sitting there looking you in the face. So is Brian Thomas Jr. So are some of those offensive linemen that we expect them to be interested in, all sitting there on the board. And the Jaguars are going to have their opportunity to get one of these guys. Wow, the board couldn't have fell any better for them. And I think Trent Baalke kind of looked at it and said, wow, with all of these guys on the board and all of these guys available, why don't we move back and let the board kind of sort itself out?
Yeah, and Trent, last week when we talked to Trent, he was talking about let the board speak. That was one of his phrases, let the board speak. And, I kept going back to the phrase when he was talking last week in the pre-draft press conference. He was talking about, you're not going to know what we're going to do until picks 11, 12, 13. Then we're going to see what happens. So I was expecting potentially a trade up in that scenario, and it worked out completely different. And, we're not talking about days 2 and day 3 of the draft. We're talking about day 1 now. And I love what they did in getting Brian Thomas Jr. He fills an exceptional need. He's a big-bodied receiver. And we talked about you had to add a piece in the draft, be it day 1, day 3, something like that, because at receiver, you've got high-priced guys all over the place. Gabe Davis, who came over in a big free agent deal. Zay Jones, free agent deal. Christian Kirk, free agent deal. You need somebody to be able to grow with Trevor Lawrence, and they finally got that in Brian Thomas. I like the pick, and again, the dubious 0-for-4 first-round history in receivers. I lived through the Matt Jones, through the Reggie Williams, R.J. Sauer, Justin Blackman, all those guys washed out for varying reasons. I think Reggie Williams overdrafted. Matt Jones should have never been drafted. He was a quarterback in college. Try to convert him to receiver. R.J. Sauer, substance abuse issues. Justin Blackman, substance abuse issues. And Blackman was a phenomenal guy had he been able to keep his head straight. So you move that history to the side. You give Brian Thomas Jr. a clean slate. I mean, those guys had to come in and be the guy almost immediately, or they were expected to be the guy immediately just by. He does not. He could come in and be wide receiver 4, wide receiver 3, and I like the fit. I like the situation. Remember DJ Chark, an excellent success story. He was a second-round pick out of LSU, had a forgettable rookie season, and ended up being a 1,000-yard receiver in year 2. So I like the pick of Brian Thomas Jr. 17 touchdown catches last year, led all college football. Pretty impressive.
So we did our grades right after this thing, and as I was sitting there kind of pondering how I would grade this thing, I know I would have felt very differently about the pick if they would have called his name at 17.
Same.
Maybe I don't know if I'd have failed it, but I wouldn't have loved it. Like at 23, I love it. I think that's fantastic because you have to add in the value they got from Minnesota. So that all in one package. You got those picks for next year, plus you got Brian Thomas Jr. huge move. Great trade, great combination. You get a guy that people thought you could get at 17. If they just went with Brian Thomas Jr. at 17, I'm maybe middle of the road on it. But at the trade with the trade back, love it. So if he was the pick at 17, how would you?
I would have probably felt B- for that.
Yeah.
For that. Just, I mean, again, he's wide receiver 4. We've talked about this pretty exclusively in the past on the pod. It would have felt almost like, to me, it would have felt like a Nate Wiggins kind of pick. I think a Terrion Arnold, Quinyon Mitchell at 17, I think would have been like, yeah, okay, that's decent. But, Brian Thomas Jr., there was a clear drop-off between those top 3 receivers and Brian Thomas Jr., no offense to him, but just a clear drop-off for him. But I thought 17 would have been a little rich. But again, if you get Brian Thomas Jr. for what amounted to, in all draft value by draft charts siphoned out, basically a late second-round pick was all the value that Minnesota sent back to them in forms of the 3 additional draft picks. So you get the guy you wanted and 3 additional draft picks, which translate to essentially a second-rounder when you factor everything in. So I think it's a home run. He's not a guy who has to come in and start immediately, even though people are wanting him to. He can learn from some veterans. You didn't take an offensive lineman and create the Cam Robinson scenario where you want to scuttle him or get rid of him. I think it was a perfect scenario for Trent Baalke. I think he aced the first night of the draft for sure.
I know you did. All right. So what happens with corner? So they passed on the top cornerbacks. Any upset there? Because I never really loved. I didn't love Quinyon and Terrion. I think I've said that a few times here. Look, I just didn't love them. I really like some of the other corners that are available behind them, but those 2 guys were sitting on the board. Those were the guys that people felt like were the top of the board. I'm not upset that they passed on either one of them, because if I had to pick, I'd pick Quinyon out of the 2, but I just didn't, I really like him, but I didn't love him. I didn't think that he was going to walk in and be a lockdown corner day one. I don't think he's Sauce Gardner. I don't think he's Patrick Surtain. And Terrion, I guess, yeah, he's a guy.
And to me, I think those cornerbacks, I think the NFL team spoke, because, I mean, your top 14 picks in the draft are offensive guys. Your cornerbacks are not coming off the board at all. You could get the top 1 or 2 rated cornerbacks at pick 15, 16, 17, and that just did not happen. So I thought that was interesting. So, I mean, I think the NFL kind of had the same read as maybe you did on not being as high on these guys as some others.
I do just want to point out, I was catching grief about Nate Wiggins. I caught a lot of grief about Nate Wiggins over the past week or 2, and he went in the first round while guys like Cooper DeJean and Kool-Aid McKinstry did not.
And then
I just want to point out, and I also want to point out that he went in the first round to the Baltimore Ravens, who have a really good track record of drafting defensive players over the last, 15, 20 years, especially ones in the first round. So I'm just going to say, maybe, just maybe,
not that bad. Not that bad. I mean, I didn't like Nate Wiggins for Jacksonville, but I mean, going to the Ravens is not a bad sign. To me, you're getting away why you didn't get cornerback in the first round. I think Jacksonville said, hey, receiver is a bigger value, and Brian Thomas is too big of a talent to pass up. And I think they, again, you have to invest in receiver at some point in Trevor Lawrence's career. And I'm not talking about free agent guys like Elijah Cooks, Parker Washington. You need to invest some resources, first, second, third round pick, into a guy that can grow and develop with Trevor Lawrence. They've reinvest in the offensive line, love it or hate it, whatever you do. But you have to get Trevor Lawrence a blue chip receiver. They did it with Brian Thomas Jr., and I do not hate the pick. I'm with you all the way on 17 as opposed to 23. 17, I like it. 23, I love it.
I think it's really that simple with it. Like, you move back a couple picks, you pick up some extra stuff, love the pick. I think Brian Thomas is going to fit seamlessly kind of into that Jaguars offense. So he brings something that we kind of talked about to the table. Like, I kind of used Xavier Worthy as the sales pitch for speed previously, but Brian Thomas Jr. has every bit of that speed. 4.33,
yep,
and he's big. So he has that perfect combination of size, speed. I think every time I talked about him on the podcast, I just said, look, he's a size, speed freak. It's going to be tough for this guy not to be successful in the NFL at that size, at that weight, running that fast. Like, those kind of guys just tend to find success because the NFL is a league where the elite athletes tend to figure it out eventually. And day one, you figure, at the very least, you send Brian Thomas Jr. out there, and I don't think he's the most developed route runner. And Doug Peterson even said in Brian Thomas's introductory press conference today that they're going to ask him to run some routes that he wasn't asked to do at LSU because LSU didn't ask him to run the most complete route tree. Day one, worst case scenario, Brian, go run straight down the field.
Yeah.
Run past the other guy.
Yep.
And the safeties have to respect it. The Jaguars don't have another receiver that can run, and the safeties have to be threatened from the first step of this guy might run past my corner. I got to worry about him taking the top.
Yeah, and you didn't have that last year. I mean, you had Calvin Ridley wasn't a burner. I mean, Calvin Ridley was quick, but he was not a guy that you said he's not a Tyreek Hill kind of guy. You did not have to worry about him getting behind a cornerback. I mean, Calvin ran routes very well, like Christian Kirk, but Calvin wasn't a burner. But Gabe Davis can fly now, and Brian Thomas Jr. can fly. So that is something that Jacksonville has sorely missed. And I think I said these exact words last week. I felt much better with Brian Thomas Jr., Gabe Davis, Zay Jones, and Christian Kirk than I do with Christian Kirk, Gabe Davis, Zay Jones entering the season. Now you got 4 guys there. You got some room to play with, some dimensions in this offense now that didn't exist before. Even when Calvin Ridley was there, I think Brian Thomas Jr. will be an upgrade over Calvin long term.
The biggest beneficiary of all this, he can finally put the Brandon Ayuk and T.
Oh man, I would have loved one of those 2 guys, but I don't know. Maybe. I mean, do you think that's dead? Do you think maybe Trader Trent? He's sitting there and saying, "Hey, I've got a 3rd and 4th next year." And
Gabe, they've already paid and invested in Christian Kirk, and you just spent a 1st-round pick. It is
Brandon Ayuk, Gabe Davis, Christian Kirk, Brian Thomas Jr. Get Zay Jones out of there? What do you think?
I think Zay Jones might be out of there already. I mean, at the very least, he's the 4th receiver in depth, and then he's gone the next year. He's in the last year of his contract. Zay is the farthest thing from a roster lock at this point.
Yeah.
So there's a possibility that when day one comes, he's not there. So I
Who's your number 1 receiver right now? Christian? Christian still.
Is what he does as Doug Peterson's offense. That's what it's going to be. Can Brian Thomas Jr. be there one day? Maybe. Not today.
Not today. I'm with you, too. I think Christian's still got. I mean, we saw what happened last year with that offense. And that's why getting a receiver who can grow with Trevor Lawrence, again, not Parker Washington, not a 5th, 6th-round pick, that type guy. No knock on Parker. But you need a guy, a blue chip, a creme de la creme kind of guy who can get in there. And there's a reason why those Marvin Harrison Jr.'s and Malik Neighbors and those guys are so sought after because they don't grow on trees at all. Those guys are diamonds, and you do not find those. And getting Brian Thomas, who is definitely a diamond as well. To me, he was clear wide receiver 4 in this class, and there were 3 elite ones. You take those 3 guys out of there, Brian Thomas would have been the number 1 receiver in this class, and Jacksonville had to do something to do that. And cornerback is obviously a big need, but I think they felt good with Ronald Darby coming in. He's Darius Williams all over again. He can play the outside. And again, I think you address those. Trent said, hey, we address needs in free agency more than we address needs in the draft. And I think Brian Thomas Jr. is a great pick for Jacksonville. Again, a little worried about that Jacksonville first-round history, having lived through it before, but I do think they did the right thing. I mean, the trading back to me was just the cherry on top.
At the absolute worst, Brian Thomas Jr. is something like maybe Martavius Bryant. Big guy, gets down the field, makes catches. That's at the worst. At the ceiling, I mean, he can be fantastic.
Let me ask you this. What's your, right now, sitting here today, day after first round of the draft,
okay,
what's your Brian Thomas ceiling? What is he going to do this year? This year, is he going to have a DJ Chark rookie season? Is he going to have a rookie season like maybe a Reggie Williams? What is he going to do to you? Just on paper today, haven't talked to him, know his fit in the offense. What is he to you this year?
Well, to figure out where he's going to fit in the offense, you also got to think about what Gabe Davis's numbers are going to be. So I think, assuming everybody's healthy for the entire.
Let's say perfect scenario. Everybody's healthy.
Perfect scenario. I think Christian Kirk's back at 1,000 yards.
Yep.
I would say Gabe Davis is somewhere right around 1,000, maybe 900.
Okay.
In that realm. And I would say Brian Thomas Jr. ends up knocking on the door.
That's why.
Somewhere right in there. couple touchdowns along the way. I don't think he gets to Iraq the first year, just ultimately because you're going to spread it out. I think you're also got to throw in that Evan Ingram's going to be in that 700-800 yard range. And I think if Zay Jones makes the roster, which I think there's a good chance he does stick around and make the roster, I think Zay Jones is still going to rotate in there. So you give him another 400 or 500 yards. So
over or under 700 for Brian? Over. Okay. I'm going to say under. I'm going to say about 675 for him. And I'll say 4 touchdowns. I think he doubles. I think he gets it over, doubles that 2 touchdown ratio. So 675 and 4 for me for Brian.
We're on that. So just a little over 700, maybe 725, something like that in that realm, creeping toward 8. I think there's going to be opportunities there. Christian Kirk does so many things underneath, and Trevor Lawrence has shown that he can throw the ball down the field. Problem is that there haven't been a whole lot of guys that like excelled in that his time here. So now they finally got one of those guys, and they've done a good job at, like, we talked a lot about what he threw to at Clemson and made campaigns for, them needing this big body receiver. And now they've gotten 2 guys that fit the stature and almost similar to the play styles of what he had when he was at Clemson. Gabe Davis is a bigger receiver who excels at going down the field. And Brian Thomas Jr. is the same thing. 6'3", he is a bigger receiver who excels at going down the field. So now you got those 2 options, and I guess if you want to go back to his Clemson days, then you throw in Christian Kirk as the Hunter Renfrow, who works the intermediates, and all of a sudden you copy-paste and hope for the same result.
Now, I was hoping last night as Brock Bowers slid down that board, and there had been buzz about Brock Bowers. If you listen to this, I think you know my affinity for having that 2 tight ends with the Georgia guy in there, but that did not happen. But I think that would have been a great pick too. It was intriguing to me as he fell down that board.
Look, the biggest surprise pick of all of them, Michael.
Wow.
We're to the Falcon. Like, what is Atlanta doing? What? You just paid Kirk Cousins. Why would you do that? I mean, Kirk Cousins got to be just saying, all right, well, I'm just going to count my money and y'all can play a rookie if you want.
I mean, you're almost following the Packers strategy, and we saw Jordan Love had a great time after sitting, right? But you almost defeat the purpose of getting a quarterback on a rookie cost-controlled salary for 2 years, and you're paying Kirk Cousins at the top of the market, and you're wasting 2 of Michael Penix's cost-controlled years by paying Kirk Cousins top of the market value. It doesn't make sense to me.
But keep in mind, when the Packers have done this, both with Aaron Rodgers and Jordan Love, it was the end of the first round.
Not top 10.
Like, it's one thing if, like, Penix is sliding and everybody's like, oh, my goodness, he's going to be here at 24. And all of a sudden, the Falcons jump in and do it. Then, okay, I get it. I mean, even though I don't know if everybody would have been freaking out that Penix was sliding down boards. But
yeah, that was mystifying pick to me because I just don't get it. I know Kirk Cousins' injury coming off Achilles, but you don't pay a guy $100 million if you got concerns about his health, and that $100 million over 2 years, that's guaranteed. That's crazy to me. That again, you waste 2 of Michael Penix's cost-controlled years by paying Kirk Cousins, your franchise quarterback, who you've pissed off in the meantime because. If you're Kirk Cousins, you're like, hey, use that number 8 pick to help the team. I mean, do something, invest in the offense, get a better lineman, get something better on that defense, something like that to help me win while I'm here, not draft my replacement. I mean, that to me, that's a way of alienating your franchise guy. Baffling pick. I don't know what Terry Fontenot was thinking.
Didn't make any sense. Then still don't make sense now. I don't know. The Jaguars are in a better shape, though. So we're doing this after day 1 of the draft, so the Jaguars still have quite a few more picks to make over the next couple of days. We'll do another one of these podcasts to try and wrap everything up once the draft and we have the full draft class. But just wanted to get some kind of instant reaction to Brian Thomas Jr. after he made gear to Jacksonville. Hey, thanks for hanging out with us here on the News4JAGs podcast, and we'll see you next time.